Packing the Courts, and Totalitarian Warts. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is February 16th, 2021, although that may not be when this airs, depending on how weird this whole winter weather comes, so prepare for some of the dates to be off, but it doesn't mean I don't love you. On this date in history, in February, today's February 16th, 2021. On this date in history, 5 years ago today, my nephew, Cash Brazos Aiken, was born. He is very, very smart. It's what happens when your parents are salutatorian and valedictorian. I don't know. I like him. Throughout the Great Depression, FDR was trying to come up with new ways to try and take care of things, and a lot of things aren't going to work. Some people might say that he was really reckless with his spending, but the problem was the Great Depression was a crisis that the world had never really seen before to this degree, and so that kind of leads us to where we are here. Okay, so the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. This is under Harry Hopkins. By the way, Hopkins is going to be in charge of several of these different administrations. This is going to give money to state and local agencies to fund relief projects. It's meant to make it possible for it's meant to make it possible to get money to people that need it the most. This organization will later on become FEMA. Okay, and for anyone who has negative feelings about FEMA, the purpose of it is good, even if it's not administrated the way that it should be. There needs to be something like that in place. The Civil Works Administration. This was another attempt led by Hopkins that was trying to try and give people, relief that they needed, but also to give them some purpose. And so this hired people directly throughout the United States and started them just by raking public leaves. Okay. Eventually, they're going to move on to do other projects. They build 255,000 miles of roads. They build 40,000 schools, thousands of airports, and they spent about $200 million a month. They ended up hiring 4 million people eventually. The Agricultural Adjustment Act. This paid farmers not to plant. This would lower production, but it would also increase the prices. It also would kind of help protect some of our farmland by leaving some land fallow each year. Now, the way that this worked is if you were given money not to plant, you weren't allowed to farm anything during that time, even a little garden for yourselves. Okay? But the problem was eventually they're going to bring up cases where the government doesn't have the right to do this, and it's challenged and declared unconstitutional in court. And I'll be completely honest, I don't entirely understand why this is declared unconstitutional. Now, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, what this does is they buy failing mortgages and refinance them for people with jobs. Okay, the way that this would go is if you had a job at all, what they would do is the government. This is really what a refinance is. Okay, so just to kind of explain this, let's say that you're buying a $100,000 home and you live in it for 20 years. Okay, you have kids and they're going to college about the time that you hit the 20-year note of 30 years on your mortgage. Now, you borrow $100,000, you would think that after 20 years you only owe about $30,000 or $35,000. But the truth is, at that point, you probably owe somewhere closer to $55,000. Okay, so once you get to that point, what's going to happen is, and I'm sorry if I'm getting myself off track here. Once you get to that point, then what you can do is you can refinance the mortgage, and they give you another 30 years to pay it off. So instead of you being done in 10 years, you'll be done in 30 years, but instead of making a payment of $1,100 a month, it might be closer to $600 or $700. Okay, and so that would be something that would allow you to do other things. In this case, it kept more people from becoming homeless during the Great Depression. Now, the Wagner Act. This is created because one of the things that they did in studying labor and salaries during this time period, because a lot of people were paying taxes, was that people in unions generally made more money than people that weren't in unions. So the Wagner Act is going to guarantee the right to organize unions and collectively bargain. Okay, collectively bargain means you can have one person that negotiates for everyone that works there. So they created the National Labor Relations Board. If you remember, we talked about blacklist, where if you're someone who helped organize a union or a strike, then you were put on a list that no one else would hire. Okay, so the way to get around this is they would organize factory elections by secret ballot to see if workers wanted to form a union. Okay, so then no one would know who actually wanted a union and who didn't. So there couldn't really be a blacklist then. They also created binding arbitration. This is where a neutral party would listen and decide the issue. Now, we talked about arbitration with Theodore Roosevelt, where two people would listen to a third party, but then ultimately, they may or may not follow what they say. The way that binding arbitration works is you listen to both sides, and then you have to follow whatever advice that they give. Okay? This is basically going to mom or dad. Hey, mom, dad, blank is blanking my blank. Okay? Bobby's stealing my headphones. Okay? And so what do mom and dad do? Well, what I do is then no one gets the headphones. No one gets to enjoy them. So, anyway, I do that so that people in my household learn how to work things out instead of bring it to me all the time. Because I won't be fair. Because I'm evil. Father Coughlin, okay? He is the priest on the left-hand side. He had 40 million fans or listeners to his weekly radio show. And he was really against the New Deal. He was against the fascist leaders coming up in Europe, Hitler, Mussolini, Franco. And he was also anti-Semitic. He hated the Jews. On the right-hand side there, you see Huey Long. He was from Louisiana. He was someone that was running for president. He's against the New Deal. And his plan to try and fix everything was giving every family $5,000. But ultimately, he is assassinated in Louisiana in 1935. Frances Perkins, I don't know if you remember her, on the left-hand side. She was involved after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in trying to make factories safer and helped put in things to restrict things like sweatshops from existing. Didn't work entirely, but she made some major headway into that. Well, she is the first woman that is appointed to a cabinet position. She was the Secretary of Labor under FDR. The National Recovery Act. This is something that urges consumers to buy only from National Recovery Act companies with the Blue Eagle symbol. It was the equivalent of Made in the USA. So you put this on there. Eventually, this was also declared unconstitutional. I kind of like the picture on the right-hand side because I like to play how many people are actually in the picture, and a lot of people will count 8 girls, but then you don't notice that there's 2 of the girls that are on the poster, and one of the girls is right next to her picture, and I think the girl on the right is the top girl on the left on the poster. Anyway. The Public Works Administration. Now, this was also another really expensive set of projects, but a lot of it was needed. These are 34,000 construction projects. They built public buildings, they built highways, and they also built the Grand Coulee Dam up in the northwest near in Oregon and in Washington State. This is the largest structure that had been built going back to the Great Wall of China. Just with the amount of concrete in it and, anyway. kind of a big deal. Now, the Federal Housing Authority. This gives small loans to improve or complete homes. And if you are buying a home, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, you will most likely get an FHA mortgage. By the way, I will talk about the difference between FHA loans and conventional loans whenever we get to the financial literacy part of the class in May. So anyway, you can look forward to that or dread it. Okay, Social Security Act. Okay, this is providing some type of care for the elderly, for the unemployed, and other needy people. Okay, so I think we're all familiar with the elderly. You start to collect this, I think the youngest you can do is 62 and a half, and I think you have to start collecting it around 70. I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that part right there. Okay, so anyway, that's the elderly. Unemployed people, this is where your unemployment comes from Social Security. Again, you pay into this from your very first job, unless you're getting illegally paid under the table. You get paid from that, and then you also where else do I want to go? Oh, and needy people. So if you die and your kids are under 18, then you will get a check from Social Security until you turn 18. Now, that doesn't mean the money goes directly to you. It can go to your guardian to help take care of you. It just depends. Whenever my wife's mother passed away, whenever she was in high school, she got checks until she was 18. So did her younger sister, who was 8 at the time. She got checks for the next 10 years. And I know you're thinking probably, wow, lucky, gets all those checks. I don't know that anyone would rather trade their mom just to get a few paychecks. The Committee of Industrial Organizations. This organized industrial unions for skilled and unskilled workers in the auto industry. Skilled workers would be like a machinist, someone who works on machines, knows how to work and fix machines, and then people who just run the machines on a daily basis. Might include welders, and again, some things are more specialized than others as far as skills and jobs within the auto industry. They actually will put together the first sit-down strike to General Motors in Flint, Michigan. A sit-down strike is whenever you're on strike, so you're not working. But the big problem with going on strike is that companies may hire strike breakers to go in and the election of 1936. Okay, there were some kind of big things that came out of this. Number one, you have the American Liberty League. These are wealthy Republican conservatives against the New Deal. Okay, their candidate of Alfred Landon was beaten by FDR. One of the things about these wealthy Republican conservatives, a lot of the money that they were paying in taxes was going to cover the things from the New Deal, and they didn't like the way that the government was administering the taxes they were paying in, which, I have to say I'm not always happy with the way that the government does things. Whenever you put together a stimulus package and $1 out of every $8 goes to Americans, but about $5 out of every $8 goes to other countries, it just makes me kind of confused about what the government's doing during an economic depression. One of the major things that comes out of the election 1936 is the fact that African Americans begin to support the Democratic Party in large numbers starting in 1936. This ends 70 years of African Americans supporting the Democratic Party. I just find it a little bit ironic that this shift is still going on in 1936, whenever the Democratic Party largely represents the KKK. Now, by 1964, you'll see a massive shift from this, where, to me it would make more sense at that time. But anyway, That's more just my commentary than anything else. Unemployment actually falls from 25% to 15%. So the Great Depression doesn't hit every family. There's several families that still are able to find work, but anyway. The National Industrial Recovery Act. This allowed the president to decide if some companies could be monopolies. And it also would let the president approve codes of fair competition. So FDR could decide, is this company keeping other companies from being able to compete? Is this fair what they're doing, or is this not fair what they're doing? Okay, which puts a lot of the power in the hands of just one person. Okay, so this is going to be a major problem. And Schechter versus the U.S., the Supreme Court says that the NRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act, cannot exist because Congress can't give powers to the president. The only way that Congress can give powers to the president is through an amendment to the Constitution. So, it's good that they're being a watchdog at this point, although it might have made the economy better had they not gotten involved here. But later on it can be a major problem because there's times where they should limit the power of the president, and it doesn't. Okay, the court packing plan. Okay, so FDR sees that the Supreme Court has struck down the NRA, the NIRA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and is talking about going after a few more programs. And so he decides he's going to increase the number of judges on the Supreme Court. And this is really dangerous, because what this means is you can take out the power of the Supreme Court. Okay, so you just put in enough judges to cover the programs you want to put in, and if the opposite party is elected the next time, they add 2 or 3 judges until they have a majority, and then instead of having a Supreme Court that actually provides checks and balances, what happens is you have, instead of a three branch system, you really just have a 2-branch system. Anyway, moving on to the 20th Amendment. This is one I've been alluding to for a while. This is going to reduce the amount of time for lame duck presidency. That's the time period between when the next president is elected and the time that they're removed from office. With the election of 2020, you saw how problematic it was for the president to still be in office for another 10 weeks. So what this did is, before it was, instead of 10 weeks, it was 16 weeks. Or is it 17 weeks? 16 to 17 weeks between the time someone was elected and the time they took office, which made it even more dangerous because of that long time period. So what happens here is they move inauguration from March the 4th to January 20th for presidents, and that January the 3rd was whenever people would take their positions in Congress. So this is to try and improve this. So that's the 20th Amendment. Now, a quick reminder of our amendments. We have the 13th Amendment, which bans slavery. The 14th Amendment, which is citizenship and civil rights. The 15th Amendment, which is voting rights for all men. The 16th Amendment, remember when you're 16 you get a job and you have to pay income tax. So the 16th Amendment is income tax. The 17th Amendment is the direct election of senators. The 18th Amendment is prohibition. Remember, at 18 you can't drink, so that's prohibition. The 19th Amendment, women get the right to vote. The 20th Amendment is changing the inauguration date. And the 21st Amendment, when you're 21, what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to drink, so that's the repeal or canceling of prohibition. Okay, the Works Progress Administration. Another thing under Harry Hopkins. They could have called the New Deal Harry Hopkins Things, but that would be kind of boring and weird. New Deal's easier to remember. They spent $11 billion. That's billion with a B. Okay? They created jobs for people working in the arts. artists, musicians, people that worked in the theater, actors, writers. Some of them were hired to entertain, but others were hired to build buildings, bridges, and hard surface roads. They provide some of the art and public facilities as well. So this is all done with the Works Progress Administration. Got some pictures here for you. I really like this one on the left. It says women in the WPA, and it has a woman on the left and a man on the right. So that's kind of weird for women in the WPA. They do a better job on the right-hand side. This is some of the other things done. Again, we hired a lot of artists. So on the top left-hand side, you see an exhibition of photographs. Next up, you see a theater presenting a play. You have paintings by children there in the top center. An advertisement for another play on the far right. An orchestra band concert. The bottom row, you have another music project where they're teaching people how to play instruments. Female painters. You have you have a choir. An African American band, and then last but not least, you have another play. Here you have what's called the Federal Writers Project, and what they did is they went and they interviewed former slaves to try and get their stories. Some of them were covered by more than one person, and they found that they got much different stories from former slaves when they were interviewed by white or by black people. So they actually went through and did a full round of interviews with both groups recording. Now, one of the weirder policies that everyone adopts, and whenever I mean everyone, I mean nations, adopt whenever you have some type of economic crisis, and that is Keynesianism. So this is an economic theory by John Maynard Keynes, and he said that heavy spending during a recession can help jumpstart the economy. So basically, according to him, the theory is if you don't have money and you're having trouble paying your bills, as a government, the best way to get out of that is to spend money to get out of it. You've heard the old adage, you have to spend money to make money. That's not always true. Sometimes you spend money to go bankrupt. So don't think that spending is a way to get out of every one of the problems that you may have in life. The legacy of the New Deal. So, what did the New Deal actually accomplish? We spent billions and billions of dollars trying to get America back on its feet. Well, it does double the national debt, but there's a lot of limited success. Number one, it changes the role of government. The government is now responsible for mediating. It's kind of a broker state between different groups. And whenever I say broker state, again, that's playing a role where you have to get between two groups that are fighting and help settle that dispute. Number two, it requires the government to be a safety net from economic disaster. So if things are going bad in the country, it's obviously the government's fault, and the government will have to, get anyone out of trouble who's in trouble. I think you see a lot of that with the pandemic. Three, some of these programs still exist today. Social Security for one. You have the Glass-Steagall Act, which existed until the last major recession. They got rid of the restraints on banks investing deposited money, and that led to another financial crisis. The SEC is still around. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration is now FEMA. The FDIC is still in banks. So there are a lot of programs that are still around. Number four, and this is the main thing to remember here. The New Deal did not end the Depression. What ended the Depression was mobilization for World War II. So it was war that got the United States really out of the Great Depression, not anything done by the New Deal. On the downside of that, there's a lot of people in the government who really think the best way to get out of economic problems is to go to war, and there's several warmongers who will push for that. The London Economic Conference. So, all the countries in the world were supposed to go to London to meet and try and come up with some type of global policy to end the global depression. We've spent most of this unit talking about what happened in the United States, but the truth is, it hits the rest of the world, and the country hit worse by the Great Depression wasn't actually the United States, but it was Germany. And they were so desperate for anyone to help. Whenever someone finally does come along with a plan and things start to change, they're much more likely to listen to all of the other ideas that Adolf Hitler has. So it's one of the dangers during a crisis that sometimes people turn to people like that. A lot of charismatic people were put in charge, and many of them turned out to be monsters during this time. That goes with the enabling dictators to gain power. FDR ends up leaving after he sees it not going anywhere. The Reciprocal Trade Agreement, this is going to lower tariffs to increase international trade. We'd lower ours and they would lower theirs. Now, one of the big drains on the U.S. economy was actually having the Philippines. And so the Tidings-McDuffie Act would give the Philippines independence and make it so that we didn't have to support them financially. We would get to keep our naval bases there, though. Totalitarianism. This kind of all gets grouped into one big ball of countries that are not like the United States. The nation's more important than the person. Individuals mean nothing. This is things like Soviet Russia or the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, imperialist Japan under Hideki Tojo. That's not the emperor's Hirohito, but they're run by their prime minister at the time. Adolf Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, Francisco Franco in Spain. So these are the big bads, even though we're friends with some of them. I know it's inconsistent. Joseph Stalin takes over after Lenin, okay? And this is really bad for a couple of reasons. Number one is the way that Lenin dies. Lenin's shot in the head, and he survives it, and he's mostly intact mentally, but he dies of a stroke a couple months after he's shot. Because of this assassination attempt on Lenin, Stalin goes crazy, and then anyone who's looking to conspire against him in any way, he rounds up them, their spouses, the extended family, going out to cousins and second cousins, aunts and uncles, great grandparents, great uncles, and then down the opposite way to great nephews and your second cousins. And he'll round up all of them, their close friends and their extended family, and then wipe all of them out. So really there's only a vague memory that you existed afterwards. And most of what you remember is that, everyone in that family is dead. And he used the Cheka, which was his secret police, to go and take care of this. He industrialized the Soviet Union, and he forced through this industrialization. It was a process that happened in Britain and France and Germany and the United States over about 80 to 100 years, and led to a lot of major problems. But by dumping it all there at once, his actions are going to lead to the deaths of between 50 and 100 million Soviets. He's the second largest mass murderer in history just because of his actions. Whenever he tries to turn the Ukraine into a big agricultural base where they're supposed to make enough food on their farms to feed around 40 families. If they didn't have enough food for 40 families, they took every bit of food that they had and let them die there. They would get so desperate without any food for a year that you would see them eat the bark off of trees, the leather off of their shoes, and millions and millions of Ukrainians died as a result of this process of industrialization started by Stalin. Benito Mussolini, he was really the first of these dictators to come to power. He came to power in 1919. He was a former teacher. He worked in a newspaper for a while, and he was able to organize a militia together called the Black Shirts, and he took power of Italy. It's the first fascist party in Europe. He talks about how remarkable and amazing that the Italians were in history, pointing back to the success of the Roman Empire, and inspires people to support him 100%. So when Hitler takes power, what he really is hoping to become was Mussolini. He also brought back the salute of the Romans, which now when most people think of the Nazis. But Hitler stole that from them. Yeah. Turns out that Hitler guy's kind of bad, but we'll get to him later. He attacked Ethiopia with tanks and bombers to give his nation a victory that they could build off of. But he's really taking bombers and tanks out against spears and swords and people on horseback. So it's a really quick battle. The League of Nations does nothing to stop this, and it just... The League of Nations was weak anyway, and no one really respected what it was doing. This leads us to the end of yet another day. I hope everyone's doing well. As always, don't cocaine, don't AIDS, and don't COVID. And if you're walking down the street or down one of the halls and you see someone doing a cocaine and AIDS or COVID, tell them to stop. And then go let the nearest teacher know what's going on so we can stop this. We can do this together. I'm sorry, I should have more words. Anyway, I'll talk to you later.